Good morning! Welcome back to the SimsVille stories. It is time to introduce to you the first of the four main families in this custom neighborhood, the Dawson family. We are going to look at the first, second and third generation of this family in this video. And just as a reminder for the time frame, there is already a fourth generation that is starting their adult lives and has begun to create the fifth generation. But in these first family introduction videos, we are going to look at how they all got there, what happened before this fourth generation, and what the history of this family looked like. And if you're thinking, wow, this footage looks really old, yes, it really is. Most of the stuff from this first and second generation is from back in 2004, and there were times where I only took pictures instead of videos. But from the third generation on, actually from the time where the second generation got married, I almost exclusively took videos. So we'll have lots of moving pictures later on, and the graphics get better too, yeah. So without further ado, let's jump into the Dawsons. So the idea here was really to create a family who were kind of living in their own little world, not making frequent contact with the rest of their neighbors, and combining family Sims with knowledge Sims. They were mostly shy, hardworking and dedicated, and really working all of their lives towards paying their bills and keeping their lives stable to provide for their kids. They were all introverts. George was a family Sim, a stay-at-home dad, and Mary a knowledge Sim who worked in the science career. So when she was out working, George took care of the kids. All of the housework and raising the kids was mostly up to George really. He didn't mind though, he loved it. And while not being able to get a promotion often drove Mary crazy, they were really happy together. As a family, they spent most of their free time indoors, reading books, having family dinners, and discussing school subjects and results. Improving their report cards was the #1 subject at both the breakfast and the dinner table. And there were few festive gatherings, but there were some. These gatherings were usually kind of bland, usually kept within the 4 members of their household, but they all seemed to enjoy that calm way of spending time together. So I recently found this old save file where these guys are still alive, and I've always thought that George was grumpy, but he's really not. He's actually quite nice. The thing is, I have tons of memories of him running into other people's houses, yelling, scolding when they had looked at him through the telescope during the day. So the game, selects him every time because he was the first Sim ever created in this neighborhood. So that's probably where the image came from, that he is a really grumpy old guy. But it really gave him kind of the get off my lawn vibes. So that's kind of how I started seeing him. And maybe it kind of matches too, so he could be grumpy towards others, but his kids and grandkids can just always put a smile on his face, and that seems about right. So he's really neat. He is very shy and serious though, so that would really add to that image. And then we have Mary, who is really outgoing and active, which translates to her being really ambitious and rather serious and grouchy, mostly with her mind on work and not really play. And she's more sloppy than neat, which basically meant that George did all of the housekeeping. Okay, enough you guys. Thank you. So with that part behind us, it's time to move over to the second generation, where their parents kept mostly to themselves, working hard and staying home, perfectly happy living their lives that way. Things were very different for Edwin and Iris. They hung out with the other kids in the neighborhood much more, and especially Iris made friends pretty quickly. She became best friends with her next door neighbor Mariam Margolis, and they remain almost inseparable to this very day. She was also really good friends with the Hamiltons' oldest son, Robert. They're almost complete opposites, but they really always got along great. Iris is a popularity Sim, and although being kinda shy herself, she hung out with the more outgoing Sims of her age. And I imagine her being a very charming but modest person. She is genuinely interested in other people and very loyal. She's open-minded and loving, genuinely caring for others, and this made her one of the most popular Sims around town during her teenage years. I think she was actually the only Sim who got invited to everyone's birthday party at the end of their teenage years. Where the Hamilton kids were mostly forced to spend time with the Tuckers because they wanted their kids to get along with everyone in town, Iris is the only one who actually enjoyed spending time there. She was never particularly close to either Monique or Victor, but she always kept in touch with them. She also had a huge crush on Miriam's older brother Sven. They actually shared their first kiss and went steady for a while, until she saw him being very close with another girl. He did try to apologize to her, but loyalty is something very important to Iris, and she just wasn't able to forgive him. Around that time, she started focusing more on working out and thinking about a career in the athletics field in the future. By the time she got to the adult stage of her life, she had known love, friendships, was really popular, and knew that she felt drawn to a more exciting and lively environment than the home that she grew up in. The influence of being in a Margolis household that much made her look for the same kind of warmth and loving chaos in her early years of being an adult. And she continued to make more and more friends. Her brother Edwin, on the other hand, grew up almost a copy of his mother, a knowledge sim, focusing on academic achievements and spending most of his free time playing chess and reading. He was shy and serious like the rest of his family, but was much more socially awkward and didn't really know how to connect to the other kids in town. He was the sort of sim to start talking about cloud density when others said it was going to rain, and would be surprised if they looked at him funny. Guess his view of flirting would be something close to the episode from Friends with Ross and the Pizza Girl, if you've seen that one. Girls would just walk away in utter confusion, not even repulsed or anything, just really confused. Him seeing his sister's boyfriend cheat on her didn't exactly help having faith in others and in love. Robert was always nice to him though, although they were never really friends. Most people just saw him as Iris's geeky older brother, and I don't remember him having any friends at all. He would just go to parties, but usually started reading when the others were dancing. And at one point he just kinda stopped trying and started focusing on his grades, studies, and expanding his knowledge, further following in his mother's footsteps. When Edwin grew up into an adult and got a job in the science career, things started to look up for him. He met Marjorie, who was equally awkward when it comes to social stuff, and also a knowledge sim, so basically just the female version of him. In a skirt. Things really started to change for him from then on, and the future started to look brighter. Marjorie's bio says Marjorie has always been shy, doesn't really like to be around people. She spends her days buried in books and research, but she's quite nice if you ever get the chance to know her. Together they had 2 kids, twins, a boy and a girl, 2 lovely red-headed kids named Alexander and Daphne. Their family life wasn't much different from the family life he was familiar with at his parents' house. They were always close and spent family birthdays with Edwin's parents and his sister and her husband Bob. We'll get to them a little later in this video. Iris and Bob started having kids much later than Edwin and Marjorie, so they were basically the fun aunt and uncle for a long time. You see Mary still thinking about knowledge and with her mind on her job while at a birthday party. So here we have the whole family together celebrating Alexander's first birthday. And Alexander is one of the first kids of the 3rd generation in this neighborhood. And I know that this cutscene is like the same thing every time, but it's always the family standing around them that's different every time. So I used to film every single birthday and sometimes see some funny stuff happening in the background. For this example, you can see his parents like standing perfectly behind him and capturing these milestones and like capturing the way they looked at this age is something that I just really enjoyed doing, so that's why I did that. And George, yeah, he loved being a grandfather as much as he loved being a father to his kids. And even Mary, who in her older age, she was a much better grandmother than she was a mother actually. She actually spent time with her grandkids, talking to them, getting to know them, and even playing with them. Edwin, Marjorie and the kids would often visit their parents at their house. So here we are back at the 1st generation house visiting them. Alexander and Daphne, they had a pretty good start. Their life started out quite well. Both their parents spent very much time in their respective jobs, but they always made time to have dinner together. Marjorie was a specialist in the medical field, and Edwin started out as a lab assistant in the science career, but he worked his way up to top secret researcher by the end of his life. Marjorie's second biggest passion in life was cooking, so from her point of view it was just another way of how chemistry could be used in day-to-day life. And even though they both worked pretty ambitiously in their respective careers, both Marjorie and Edwin were never as caught up in that as Edwin's mother was. They found a way to combine their hard work and long hours with family life. So basically this household consisted of 4 knowledge sims, all working towards their careers, goals and school. And the kids played chess a lot. It was the first thing they would do in the morning and the last thing they would do before they went to bed. So they had a pretty high logic skill even before they reached their teenage years. Marjorie was really more the mechanical sim and Edwin more the logical and outdoorsy sim. Marjorie liked to stay indoors. It wasn't long until the kids were accepted to a private school, and even though in my game back then there wasn't any difference between the two schools, I did send the Sims that would do their homework much more often to a private school, and the other ones I kept at home every now and then to keep their grades a little low, because it's way too easy to get high grades in the base game. So I guess you could say that Daphne and Alexander had a pretty good childhood, and their family legacy of striving for academic achievements guided them towards a good education and possibilities for better careers. I think by this time George and Mary were very proud parents and grandparents to see where their children ended up and to see where their grandchildren were headed. A little later, Daphne and Alexander turned into teens, and we're going to pick up their story from their teenage years later on in this video. But first, we're going to look at Edwin's sister, Iris, and how she did after she became an adult. So during this birthday party, you can see that she was pregnant with her second child by the time that Daphne and Alexander turned into teens. And she was fulfilling her bladder needs while everyone else was cheering on Alexander. So after a quick look at what Alexander looked like when he turned into a teen, let's jump back in time a few years to Edwin's sister Iris when she first turned into adult. Being drawn to a more lively and partying lifestyle, we see her here with her two best friends, Maria Margolis and Robert Hamilton. And apparently partying for me back then meant putting a jukebox in a room and just dancing. You really have to use your imagination for this one. You can see the two of them gossiping about a little spoiler alert for the Tucker family, but apparently it really was the talk of the town back then. The location where this took place is actually the very first attempt of me building a community lot. Yeah, can you tell? Back to Iris. By this time she had a career in the athletics field. Her free time was spent mostly with friends or working out. Even though Iris was drawn to a more exciting lifestyle, she did fall for Bob, who was very close to her father in personality. Bob is a Cancer, being a very well-balanced family sim. He is relatively neat and nice, shy and quite active, and a bit more serious than playful. Bob's bio says, Bob's a police officer, just like his dad and his grandfather before him. He's like the kind of steady father figure that she could really count on, and having loyalty being one of the most important things to Iris in her life, she really fell for that, and she was attracted to him. So after a few home dates, since there were no restaurants in the town yet, Bob put on his awkward face and proposed to Iris. She of course said yes, and that is where their life together really started. By that time he had already moved in, and they were living together for quite a while. They did not get married right away. It actually took several years before there finally was a wedding. Bob had just started a job as a cadet and worked his way through further police academy training in the first years of their marriage. They loved the outdoors, working out together, both worked very hard to advance in their careers. So even though Iris was very different in a lot of ways from her parents, she did inherit their hardworking nature and believed that if you want to achieve anything in life, you have to work hard for it and take your job seriously. She did want to be a more attentive mother to her kids than her own mother was, and Bob, being a family sim, shared those ideas. So they decided to work on their careers first and have kids a few years later. So here we see Bob in their garden doing a late night workout, punching his bag. I've always thought that his strong jawline was really characteristic for Bob. And he even passed it on to his son, really, who isn't born yet, so I'll try and stick to the timeline here. Here we see Iris, who is by now pregnant with her first child. Bob was just such a proud and loving father right from the moment when his son was born. He had wanted kids since he was very young, and when his son was finally there, Bob was the happiest guy ever and so proud of his lovely wife too. They named the little boy Parker, and Parker would grow up to really inherit his father's traits. Personality-wise, we'll check on later in the video. We'll take a look at his personality, but looks, he was really the spitting image of his father. Iris continued to throw parties and spend time with her friends, and Bob really didn't mind at all. He loved that his wife was such a social butterfly and that she was the one keeping contact with all of the other neighbors, so he didn't have to. He really didn't enjoy spending time with the others that much. So he took these opportunities to just sneak upstairs and spend time with his son. So from a very early age, Parker was really close and connected to his father. Them being so much alike and the attention Bob gave to his son really formed a very warm bond between father and son. Bob really was like the most loving and caring father you can imagine. He could be strict but never harsh. He guided his kids to their adult life but let them make their own decisions and would never judge. He was a faithful and loving husband to his wife and slowly but steadily worked his way up in his career and one day became the police chief. In the introduction, you quickly saw Bob in the family bio with the description of being a town father, and I really feel like that is what he was growing towards his entire life. He's the kind of person that wouldn't talk much, but everyone just knows that they can call him whenever they need help, and he will just be there. Iris worked equally hard on her career and managed to work her way up to coach. I kept her at that level because I felt that she would give back to the community rather than going for fame as a Hall of Famer for herself. That somehow felt like too much of a self-centered thing to do, for lack of a better word. I just didn't feel like it fit her character, so she continued to build and expand her relationships, worked as a coach, along the way formed a lot of new friendships with the new generations and the new townies as her life progressed. So as a couple, they really sort of turned out to be the backbone of this entire community. But I'm getting ahead of the story again. These first few years, with only their son Parker born, they had their hands full on their careers, spending time with friends, taking care, raising Parker. As it was becoming a family tradition, everyone gathered again for Parker's birthday. So here we see Edwin playing with his nephew, George and Mary as the loving grandparents that they are, and of course Edwin's wife Marjorie and daughter Daphne are also here. There's really no reason why Alexander isn't here, except for not having a sim blender and probably not having a high enough relationship score with him. And sitting on the couch is Robert Hamilton, their close friend and neighbor from the Hamilton family. So Parker, like I said, really took after his father, and he, from a very young age, was very responsible, and he soon enough mostly took care of himself, and that is when Iris got pregnant with their second child. And here you see her sister-in-law Marjorie being really happy about becoming an aunt again. So very soon after that, Iris gave birth to her second child. That is when their daughter Willow was born, and where Parker really resembled his father, Willow was almost an exact copy of her mother. Together they formed a really nice, warm, loving family. With their family growing, Iris had less and less time to have parties, although she would still attend other parties when she was invited. But having two kids around the house and two careers mostly kept them busy and focused on their small little family at home, giving Parker and Willow a strong, loving, supportive environment to grow up in. Not long after Willow grew up into a toddler, Bob and Iris, after a 10-year engagement, finally tied the knot, and there finally was a real wedding.
Oh, foul!
And I think especially George, her father, was very happy that his daughter finally got married. So now that we've seen the first generation becoming elders and the second generation well into their adulthood, it is time to look at the third generation. We have seen Alexander and Daphne and Parker and Willow being born and growing up into respective teenagers, children, toddlers. So let's go and take a look at the family tree and start looking at their stories from their perspective. So here we have Alexander Dawson in his adult age, and he's not the best looking sim, but he sure has that Dawson look to him. He is friends with Felicia Brown and Valentine Brown, who he met in college. They were friends from his time in college. He is married to Kayla Dawson, also. He met her in college, and he has a son called Seth. He's also still friends with Castor Nova, and of course with his aunt, Iris Dawson. So looking at the family tree, this is where we are. So we're in the third generation here. Yeah, let's take a closer look at Alexander. He by now has a job in the natural scientist career as a natural crossbreeder. I do have plans for a community lot for him. Personality-wise, he is very, very shy, as most of the Dawsons are. He is also very neat, a trait that we have seen passed down the generations from George Dawson, his grandfather. He is very active, rather serious, and very, very nice. His niceness is something that kind of differentiates him from his parents, his grandparents, and his sister. He has a soft heart, just like the rest of his family, and can be a bit naive at times. But unlike his sister, he has just been kind of lucky that nothing really bad ever happened to him, and that he only met people who didn't take advantage of that niceness, but instead encouraged it and felt safe around him. Overall, he's just a really nice and active Sim who wants to do good for other people. And his way of doing that is by doing research that he believes is going to change the world. So he followed in his father's and his grandmother's footsteps by going into the science career, even though he chose a closely related subject in the natural sciences. We can see that his hobby is science. You can also see the telescope back there, which is something that he uses quite often. We are not going to go through all of his memories because there are so many of them. But we can see that he learned to walk from Edwin, learned to talk from Marjorie, potty trained by Marjorie, and then he had a big birthday party that we just saw. Another thing that you probably saw in the family tree is that Daphne's portrait is grayed out, which means that she is not alive anymore, and we're going to see why and what happened there shortly. Also, all of these third generation Sims could probably use a makeover, but we are not going to do that until they reach the elder life stage, which will be in only a few days. But to further understand Alexander, we first need to take a look at what happened to him since he turned into a teenager. Alexander did very well in school, but wasn't exactly born with the ability to connect to others very easily. He inherited his grandfather's and father's awkward social ways and was very shy. He wanted to fit in, but he just always managed to say the wrong thing at the wrong time, raising many an eyebrow from his fellow teenagers in the neighborhood. It didn't really help that his sister made fun of him a lot too. He wore knitted sweaters when his classmates discovered leather jackets, and you might have seen from the previous clip that he still wears those knitted sweaters in his adult years. His parents, still very focused on academic achievements and not so much worried about their children's social skills, made sure that Alexander kept doing good in school, and they spent a lot of time helping both Alexander and Daphne with their homework in the evenings. And Alexander spent many an afternoon playing chess with his sister indoors when the other guys in the neighborhood were outdoors playing soccer or starting to go out with girls. Alexander got a job as an emergency medical technician, and that's where he kept running into Sandra, Daphne's friend. Aside from his sister, it is quite possible that he wouldn't have found the courage to even talk to a girl if it wasn't for Sandra, let alone flirt with her. And with Sandra, he could bond over work experiences, so that was kind of different. One evening after work, he finally found the courage to ask her out. They had their first kiss in the shopping mall, but it never really led to a relationship. Things kind of started to get awkward again after the kiss. And it wasn't until his years in college where things finally started to look brighter for Alexander. Long story short, on his first day in college, he played pool with a few other new students, and Kayla, being the confident and go-getter personality that she is, suddenly walked up to him and started flirting with him. So there goes the plan to let him get involved with a red-haired woman. I really like the story of the two of them getting together though. Her strong personality meshed with his awkward and shy ways, her thinking he is endearing and him being completely fascinated and almost hypnotized by her confidence. I could totally see their future together and how they would support each other in their careers and how Kayla would help him become a more confident and balanced person. I do have this sort of nature versus nurture thing going on in these families, and it's almost a shame that you can only use the social option to encourage someone on kids and not on partners, because I think in real life that is often what happens. We learn a lot from our relationships, friends too, but mostly romantic partners, I think. There's this quote from Carl Jung saying, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there's any reaction, both are transformed." And I absolutely love that quote. But more importantly, I think the Dawsons would love that quote too. So by the time Alexander was ready to graduate, he had actually made a few friends. He spent a bit more time at the coffee shop talking to the other students instead of only studying. And he threw a party together with the other graduates. And by the way, sorry for the graphics here. I, for some reason, used the lower settings in this one. I think it is safe to say that Alexander was really happy at this point in his life. He graduated together with his friends and his sister Daphne, who you see here. And he was very excited to start the rest of his life together with Kayla. They got married right after college. And thanks to not having a sim blender or using cheats, his grandfather George is out there throwing out the trash instead of attending the ceremony. But at least he was there, and you can see him in this footage, being the proud patriarch of the Dawson family and a loving grandfather. Alexander and Kayla moved into their own home. Alexander started working in a natural sciences career, and Kayla had the dream to become a renowned surgeon. They hired a live-in nanny to take care of the house and their future kids, and we will see the rest of their story through the eyes of their son Seth when we reach his household in the new episodes. He will be an adult by then and look back on his childhood in this house in flashbacks while the new stories around him unfold. So, as you know, Alexander was just one of the children in the third generation in the Dawson family. So let's go and take a look at his sister's life. Since she is not alive anymore and something went wrong with her character file, I looked in SimVille to compare her personality to that of Alexander's. And where Alexander was a Pisces, Daphne was a Virgo, having 2 more points in neat, so she had 10 points in neat, 9 points in active, and 6 points in nice, so she was a little less nice than Alexander. She had 2 points in outgoing, so 1 more than Alexander, but still very shy, like every other Dawson, and 4 points in playful. So I would say she was rather serious. So what happened to Daphne in college? One thing I can say about Daphne's life as an adult, there was a lot of sadness and her life was short. So I guess it was my way of experimenting with a life that didn't turn out that well. And since it's a little bit of a sad story, we're not going to dive into that too deeply, so we're just going to get to the highlights. But what happened at the university is that she fell in love with someone that she thought that was the love of her life. He clearly did not have the same feelings, and this is not the only time this happened to Daphne. To see why this impacted her so much, we are going to jump back a little bit in time to her teenage years and see what really caused her downfall. So Marjorie was a rational woman, very practical. She made sure that her kids had everything they needed in the form of food, education, clothing, some life advice. Having family dinners was a big thing in this household, and Marjorie always made sure that the table was full of delicious meals that she had cooked herself. I always imagined this family talking about facts, politics, science at the dinner table, debating, learning how to put their thoughts into words, but not so much talking about feelings and emotions and stuff. Alexander always lived up to his parents' standards easily, and Daphne had to work a bit harder for her grades. Even though she had an easier time making friends and being social, that was never what was highly valued in their home. The focus was always on their grades, and that was exactly what she felt insecure about. So she made fun of her brother to make her feel a little bit better about herself, but since they were twins, it was almost like making fun of herself, so she kind of hurt herself in the process too, further making her insecure about almost everything. She didn't talk about any of it, not even with her brother, and for most of her childhood, she just came across as a rather confident girl, just a bit quiet. She didn't talk that much. She did sometimes run to her Aunt Iris across the street. Talking to her helped a bit, but she was never really that open about any of her feelings. And other than that, she felt like the odd one out in her own household. As a teen, she had a crush on Ricky Cormier, who you might know as a Pleasant View townie. But that wasn't reciprocated. He flirted with her a bit, but he was a romance sim, so he really wasn't the kind of person to go for one girl. It's a shame that I don't have any footage of that part of the story, other than Ricky standing here in their living room. While she fell head over heels for him, he went on to kiss her friend Helena Margolis later on, which basically ended her friendship with both Helena and Ricky. This further fueled her insecurities, of course. So by the time they got to college, and Alexander did so well for himself there too, she really felt like she lived in his shadow, and the fact that her brother was completely oblivious about all of this made it even harder to talk about it with him, so she didn't. Add to all of that in nature the Dawsons are sweet and shy, and all of them can be a bit naive and too trusting at times. She basically fell in love with the first guy that was nice to her, not being used to the attention at all. He turned out to be a romance sim and cheated on her repeatedly. He had no understanding for her feelings and instead got mad at her because in his eyes he did nothing wrong. She then fell for the next guy, also a romance sim. And this douchebag decided to flirt with her brother's girlfriend in front of the both of them, causing quite a bit of drama. This then drove her back into the arms of Valentine, who then, of course, you can guess, cheated on her again. During all of this, she hardly got any studying done. She felt miserable about it, and her shame about not being able to live up to any standards grew stronger and stronger. And it's really a miracle that she even graduated at all. By the end of college, she met CJ, and that is the guy that she actually ended up with. He was a family sim and a really sweet guy. So she did graduate, but with really low grades, and she wasn't able to find a job afterwards. Neither was CJ. Daphne felt the pressure from her family to do good in school and so much shame about not being able to live up to their standards because her entire family, they are all knowledge sims, well except for her grandfather, but most of her family are knowledge sims and like really focused on academic achievements, and all she did in college was like fall in love with one guy after another and ending up heartbroken, and she was so ashamed of that she didn't really talk about that with her parents or, well, not even with her brother actually. He was there for most of it. It's just that they didn't really talk about it. So when they were broke, sick, and living from the last few simoleons that they had, both not being able to find a job, she didn't ask for help from her family or talk about it with anyone. Instead, they started doing the odd job here and there for some real shady people. They got a loan from this criminal organization, and within a few years they were up to their necks in debt and obligations. Living in an old and empty house that could have just as well been a trailer. Then one winter, disaster struck. They both got pneumonia. There was no way that they could pay their medical bills, so they did the only thing they could do. They stayed in their home together and they tried to take care of each other. And CJ, after rescuing Daphne from dying by taking care of her, he himself shortly thereafter died. And from here on, I do get a kind of Brandy broke vibe from her. She turned out to be pregnant with her deceased boyfriend's baby, and shortly after his passing gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She was up to her ears into debt, and there was no way she was going to find a job now with the baby. We may never really know what actually happened to Daphne. All we know is that after she gave birth to their son, maybe she had foreseen that someone could possibly hurt her or even end her life for all the trouble she had gotten herself into. Or maybe she even faked her own death to get out of it all. All we know is she made sure that her son was in good hands before she disappeared and was never seen again. She left her son Harold in the hands of Comey Tellerman, a family friend since her childhood and her next door neighbor. So through Comey Tellerman, Daphne's son Harold found his way back to his original family. And you can see him here on the lower left, sitting in front of his grandparents, not knowing much about his mother. And he was raised by his grandparents with the help of Comey and Sandy, so part of Daphne will live on in our son, and we will meet him in a future episode. And if you think his story is complicated, you should hear the one of his girlfriend. I think her childhood was even more complex, but in the years they spent with Harold's grandparents, they were happy. So after Daphne's story, it is time to move over to the next third generation Dawson, Parker. Parker is the oldest son of Iris and Bob. He is his closest friends, really his wife, Amber. They've been married a long time. He has 4 daughters that are just graduated from university. We see his mother and his father, Iris and Bob Dawson, and his best friends Roy and Tosha Hamilton, who you might know as Tosha Go. And also Leonard and Ivy Stefanov, who you might also know as Ivy Kapoor. So these 6 were just really, really close friends all throughout their childhood, and you will see them together a lot. And also in here is co-mate Tellerman, who has been a long-time friend of the family. Main reason because he had red hair, but yeah, so let's take a look at what he is doing right now. He is a general, so he went into the military career and he worked his way through right up until the highest position there, a general. Again, I have some plans for a community lot for him. That is going to probably be a lot of work, so it won't be here very soon, but it will be there eventually. Personality-wise, he is pretty balanced. He is a Pisces, a little bit more neat than sloppy, rather shy, as the Dawsons are, more active than lazy, more serious than playful, and also very, very nice. Even has more nice points than both his parents had. He has the hobby tinkering. His favorite hobby is tinkering. He did at one point have a lot of points in fitness too, because he used this thing a lot, and that could also be very fitting for him. He's very athletic, like both his parents are. So yeah, that's Parker. And in here we also saw that he is very close friends with his sister, Willow Hamilton. Going back to when Parker was still growing up, we saw that he had a very close bond with his father, 2 loving parents who were in a stable relationship, and that he was a witness to their wedding as a child. He was strong and athletic, like both of his parents, had the compassion from his mother, but the more strict way of composing himself from his father. He's the sort of guy that would break up classmates who were in a fight or sticking up for kids being bullied by others. Parker's middle name could have been responsible. Everything about him just screamed righteousness since he was at a very young age. Bullies would think twice about going against him because of that, and so he got used to being sort of an authority figure at a young age. His best friend was the Hamiltons' oldest son, Roy, who was pretty similar in character. They were so much alike in so many ways that they could have been brothers. Since he was so much older than his sister and both of his parents had a full-time job, he helped around the house a lot and even sort of helped raising his sister, cooking, helping her with schoolwork, stuff like that. He made friends easily. He is a popularity sim, and even though he is a shy, introverted and calm person, other people are just naturally drawn to him. He always goes to great lengths to help people and strives to make everyone around him happy. He met his later-to-be wife Amber when they were still teenagers. Amber had just moved to the neighborhood together with her cousin Kim, so they're not sisters, they're cousins. Both of their parents have died, and they pretty much have to fend for themselves. So even at the age of 16, they were very independent. The girls were very different in character though. Where Kim was very outgoing and loved to party, Amber was much more shy and calm. And more than anything in life, she just wanted to have a big family and lots of kids of her own. So she was a family sim. So Parker and Amber, who you can see here in the background talking to each other, they have always really been best friends first and lovers later. Parker quickly fell in love with her independent nature, her confident but modest way of composing herself, and of course her red hair. They were basically high school sweethearts, just like Roy and his girlfriend Tasha. And they continued dating all through high school and their college years. You can see here that they had their first kiss during one of Parker's parties at his home. His parents were there, but they kept to the background so the kids could have their party. These two couples, Parker and Amber and Roy and Tosha, were pretty much inseparable all through high school, university. They even started having kids at the same time. So here you see them in their dorm where they just moved in. And the 4 of them were actually the center of a bigger group of couples who all became really good friends and continue to have close relationships until this day. It didn't always go as smooth as this though. Amber knew about Parker's plans to go into the military since they were teens. It has been something he has always wanted, and she fully accepted that this would mean he would be away from home for a lot of the time, making long hours, being exhausted when he came back. She was a little hesitant with stepping into a relationship relationship like that, and she just wanted to take her time. And something happened when they had a big misunderstanding. Regina, who you see here, started flirting with Parker, and Amber became so mad at him because she thought he was taking her hesitation as an excuse to cheat on her. That did kind of split them up for a while. Not for very long though, they probably spent 2 or 3 semesters separated. But they still saw each other because Roy and Tasha were still dating, and Amber was really close friends to Tasha. Parker was still really close friends to Roy, so they saw each other all the time. Until by the end of his senior year, Parker finally apologized to Amber, and she in return apologized to him for overreacting, since she finally understood that Regina coming on to him didn't mean he did something wrong, and that he actually had the intention to cheat on her. And I use the mod romantic standards now, so let's just say that problem is fixed. So they decided that after they graduated, he would take her on a date, and they would go see a movie and see if they could find their way back to each other again. Obviously they did, because I think these two have always been perfect for each other, and there was no way that they were going to have a relationship with anyone else. They did get into a really faithful, committed, loyal relationship, and Parker introduced her to his grandfather, George, and they got his approval, and then he proposed to her in a park on a really romantic date. And even Mrs. Grumblebottom couldn't keep them apart. Here we see the whole gang together. There's actually 2 more couples that are part of their friend group, but that aren't present at the wedding. I think I mentioned Parker was a popularity sim. He wasn't so much thinking about making friends and being popular, but more constantly focused on how he could help people around him. He wouldn't talk much, just like his father, but he was compassionate and trying to help people all around, just like his mother. And he was dependable and protective of his wife, his kids, but also of his friends. They got married. For some reason they did that on the front lawn of their house, but it wasn't any less romantic, and at least all of their friends and family were there. The second part of this footage, where Amber gives a toast, it's not really that interesting, but if you look around you can actually see some other houses in the neighborhood, and some of them are still there. The 2 houses on the corner are still there, and the big ones in the back, that's really still in the middle of the neighborhood. But the other ones I moved around, and it was just kind of fun to see what it looked like back then. Empty. Parker and Amber had a happy marriage, where in essence they were always best friends first, parents to their 4 daughters second, and lovers third. They didn't have much money when they started out together, but they somehow managed to buy a house, raise their 4 daughters, pay for their education, and were never late when it came to paying bills and stuff. So money was tight, but never an issue. They both worked, and somehow they balanced everything they did, having a social life, having 2 jobs, raising their children, giving their children as much attention as they could, and really tag teaming everything. Parker was a rare combination of a strong and strict father figure. He had a good example in his father Bob, who also loved being a father. Parker had authority both at home and in the work field, but he could also be really soft and caring for his daughters and wife. He was trained by his best friend's father, who became a general long before he did, Robert Hamilton, and he became a general at a relatively young age. Both of his parents were really athletic, and he took after them. He had always been strong, and he was very determined to do whatever it takes to protect those around him. So you could say he just naturally had what it takes to make it in the military. Having connections to the Hamilton family didn't hurt either. Parker could really depend on Amber for both mental support, practical problem solving, and just about everything else. She would run the household like he would run a training camp, strict, organized, not taking any bullshit, and not taking no for an answer. Her daughters would know where their boundaries of what they could do were, but she did it in such a loving and motherly way that they always felt safe, loved, and protected. What attracted Parker to Amber in the first place, when they were teens, her independence and confident way of composing herself, that was all still there in their adult years. Being a mother and having a family didn't stop her from pursuing a career in science, and whenever she wasn't pregnant, she would work really hard to get a promotion there. Their friends had always been important to them. Roy and Tasha were always much more in the spotlight, being Hamiltons and being in politics. Others would think of Parker as Roy's calmer and quieter friend, if they thought of him at all. But in the bond that they had, things were much more the other way around. Roy really depended on Parker for his calm and rational way of approaching issues, his wise advice, and his sense of justice. So overall, this was always such a fun household to play, with lots of time management challenges and stuff. Yeah, they've been around longer than their age would say. I've aged them down quite a bit, but it is now time for them to get in line with all of the other ages in the neighborhood and to age them up. So even though their daughters never spent time with their great-grandfather George, Hannah, Vera, Jasmine, and Lara were raised with the Dawson family values. Work hard if you want to reach your goals in life, do good in school, but also be nice to others. And where the first two generations were much more focused on academic achievements, the third and fourth generation was much more self-confident. I think it was thanks to Iris and Bob, who had a really big influence on their children. And Iris was very different from her parents, and they were all more focused on being a good person rather than getting high grades. Another funny thing, if you look at this picture, the one sitting on the ground, Lara, even though Parker doesn't really look like his mother, I think Lara is like the spitting image of her grandmother, and I really love how that worked out. And we'll see footage from the rest of their lives together when we reach the episode of their children and when we start looking back on their childhood in flashbacks, because all of their daughters have graduated college and all of their daughters are going to play roles in the new episodes when we start the fourth generation. Which leaves us with one more Sim to look at in the third generation, and that is of course Willow Hamilton, the youngest of the four. So judging by her last name, you can tell who she married. She married into the Hamilton family, so we will be seeing their story in both the family trees. This is where she is in the family tree. You can see that she has 3 kids by now. And looking at her friends and family, she is married to Jake Hamilton, still very much in love. They have like an in-house maid or a nanny that lives with them. Her name is Kira. They're close friends, but that's mainly because she is around a lot. We can see that she is friends with her nieces, Parker's 4 daughters. We see 3 here, and the 4th one is a little bit more down the line, I think. Apparently she needs to call her. Then her 3 kids, Maurice, Emily, and Muriel, and her longtime best friend Julia, but we'll get to that later. Of course, Jake's parents are in here too, and her own parents, Bob, and there she is, Iris. So where the rest of her family was more into nature and science and stuff, she was much more into arts and crafts. Oh, this is really... I never changed her preferred hobbies. So even though she was always much more into arts and crafts, she apparently actually had the preferred hobby of science. So she might be a Dawson after all. Also her face, I think she is much cuter looking than any of the other Dawsons. But that might be just my personal preference. Personality-wise, she is very neat, active and playful. More nice than grouchy, and again, very shy, like all of the Dawsons. And even though her preferred hobby is science, just like the rest of her family, she spent much more time doing arts and crafts, and I might actually change this one with the Sim Blender, because she's into arts and crafts now. So did we check her hobby? No, we did not. She is a comic book penciler. She actually made her hobby into her job, and I want her to do something with that on a community lot too. It's probably going to be some kind of an art studio, and that's one of the first things on the list to build. I think it would be really fun if she would like teach the kids more about art, evening art classes, stuff like that. So we're going to set that up somewhere in the near future. But first, let's take a look at Willow's history and what happened to her since she became a toddler. We know that she had very loving parents, Iris and Bob, and a much older and protective brother, Parker. She was shy but really playful and soon became best friends with her next door neighbor, Julia Campbell, one of the Margolis' kids. They became inseparable, and everywhere Julia went, Willow went too. The age difference with her brother meant that she wasn't friends with any of his friends, but she had Julia. With 3 strong people taking care of her, she felt so cherished, and she really had the most carefree childhood you could ever imagine. Her father wasn't too happy when she grew up and started dating boys. Not that he really had much choice in the matter. She fell for Peter, and even though everyone said that he was into some shady business, she couldn't help but see the good in people, and she just liked him for who he was. She and Jake were friends, but never really more than just friends. Jake was there the moment that Peter broke up with her and broke her heart. Jake knew that Peter had his reasons to do so, and he understood, and the both of them always stayed friends. In college, Willow really continued to live a carefree life. She didn't believe in having to work hard for everything you want and need in life. She wasn't really spoiled. It's just that she never knew a life where she didn't have something. She was raised so protective and cherished and cared for that she just didn't know what it was to not have something, to really have to work for something. And she was a kind person, and she absolutely wasn't spoiled. She more or less believed that good things could also come to you if you just have fun and try to be happy. So she chose an arts major. Willow loved people, socializing, hanging out with really everyone, inheriting her mother's non-judgmental ways, and generally being liked by everyone. You could say she was a bit naive too, but having a strong brother like Parker often protected her from people even thinking about taking advantage of her. Jake's older brother, Roy Hamilton, was by then quite influential, and he always looked at her as his little sister, so that helped too. And then Peter, the boyfriend that broke up with her, he always kept a soft spot for her too. She didn't know it, but without her knowing, he always watched out for her and had her back. She loves nature, the outdoors, loves to go camping, but also arts, DIY projects around the house, and just generally making everything around her more beautiful. Willow was always kind of radiant, leaving people smiling wherever she went. There's no unkind bone in her body, and it was almost impossible not to like her. Jake had by then joined a fraternity, and during one of their parties, they ended up in the upstairs bedroom together. Willow had always thought of him as one of her best friends, and Jake too, he never thought more of it. So they both thought this was a one-time thing, and they would just go back to being good friends again after that. Willow graduated with average grades. She was excited to start life after college. And rented an apartment downtown and loved the single life. She would spend time with her friends. She sold a few paintings and worked as a bartender when she ran out of money. She remained as carefree as she had always been and was never looking for love. Her free-spirited nature was perfectly happy living a single life, and happiness seemed to go wherever she went. And then something happened at Roy Hamilton's wedding, which was kind of a big thing back then. Everyone was there, and Willow and Jake ran into each other. They realized that there was something in their relationship worth exploring, so they went out on a few dates and they fell in love. Jake is a traditional guy and soon realized Willow had been the love of his life all along. We'll hear more about his backstory when we get to the episode about the Hamiltons, but what we can say about him now is he wanted to be able to provide for Willow and his future kids before he asked her to marry him. So he worked hard, saved as much money as he could, but obviously that wasn't going to be enough since he worked as a police officer. Luckily, he has wealthy parents and they offered to lend him the rest of the money he needed to buy the house of his dreams. And once he had done that, he took Willow to see this beautiful house and the future he saw for the two of them and proposed to her right there on the driveway.
Oh, Father Silo. Oh, Revivo. Oh.
We will see what happened after that in the next episode. That will be the one where we introduce the Hamiltons. And of course, Jake is a third generation Hamilton, so he and his story will be in there. But all we can say now is their wedding was one of the biggest events in town. Willow got her own part of the house where she could do her arts and crafts in good lighting. And as you saw in the family tree, they had 3 children together. So it wasn't long after their marriage that she got pregnant with their first child. And of course, those children are in college now. So yeah, with that, we have almost reached the end of this episode. Since we have reached the 5th generation, you must have guessed by now that the first generation is not alive anymore. In the present day, George and Mary have reached the end of their lives. They had a very long and happy life and eventually died from old age. Mary went a little sooner than George, so George was around for a little bit longer. And what we see here is a clip of 3 generations of Dawson men together right before George Dawson passed away. All of the first generation Sims have reached the end of their stories, so to speak. Edwin and Marjorie were then the first Sims of the 2nd generation to pass away. They lived out the rest of their lives quite content in the home they had always lived in and where they raised their children. The disappearance of their daughter left them with a great sadness, but they were happy to have their grandson live with them and to be able to see him grow into an adult. Iris and Bob are still happy and very much active in the community together and thriving. They have reached the end of their lives almost, so we are going to have to say goodbye to them very soon, but they will play a part in the first few episodes of the new series. So right after these introductions, the actual episodes of the series are going to start, and we're going to start with the 4th generation, and Bob and Iris will play a big role in that. The next time we will see the Dawsons will be when Bob retires from his work as a police lieutenant and Jake Hamilton takes over, Seth Dawson sets up his home business, and Harold takes over the research center founded in Edwin Dawson's name. I'm very excited to start working on that, and I hope to see you there. For now, thanks for watching this video. Have a good week.